So we have some breaking news that the Reverend Jesse Jackson is endorsing Bernie Sanders for president in 2020. And this endorsement means a lot for a variety of reasons. Of course, Joe Biden has had a lead over African American voters thus far in the process. And so the support of the Reverend Jesse Jackson has a great deal of meaning. Of course, he does not speak for all African Americans, but he has an influential role within the African American community. And the endorsement for Bernie is likely to move at least some manner of support from Biden to Bernie. But it's more than that. Jesse Jackson's endorsement represents the very motivations for Bernie Sanders' campaign. There's a real historical link between the work of Jesse Jackson and between the work of Bernie Sanders, and how they both see a progressive path forward as the only way to achieve both economic and racial justice. And there's a great quote here by Jackson about why he's endorsing Bernie this time around. I'm going to read it out. With the exception of Native Americans, African Americans are the people who are most behind socially and economically in the United States, and our needs are not moderate. A people far behind cannot catch up choosing the most moderate path. The most progressive social and economic path gives us the best chance to catch up, and Senator Bernie Sanders represents the most progressive path. That's why I choose to endorse him today. So it's simply put, Joe Biden's moderate nature, Joe Biden's viewpoint, and the Democratic Party's viewpoint that the only way you defeat Donald Trump is with a moderate, and that progressive policies won't win, so there's no point in supporting them. Support, milquetoast neoliberalism, isn't selling Jesse Jackson. He's not buying that proposition. African Americans, Native Americans, marginalized people from all sorts of backgrounds will never catch up. They'll only fall further and further behind if you make moderation your calling card. You need to unabashedly challenge the social and political and economic status quo if you want to allow marginalized people to have better opportunities and better success and better equality and better dignity in their day-to-day lives now and into the future. And Jesse Jackson gets that. Only Bernie Sanders is offering that at this stage. So, it's a crucial endorsement, and it's not just that Jesse Jackson is endorsing Bernie, because Bernie Sanders has made notable commitments to Jesse Jackson, investing in historical black colleges and universities, fighting to put a woman of color on the Supreme Court, fighting to ensure that racial justice and economic justice are not two separate silos, but that are connected through wealth taxes and through other forms of redistribution that will ensure that the rich and wealthy and well-connected, which are disproportionately white, will have their resources tailored in part towards causes that help everyone, but because they're helping working class and marginalized people, it will have disproportionate benefits in helping the racialized, who are more often to be on minimum wage, who are more often to be economically struggling, often because of legacies of discrimination and prejudice and inequality. Bernie Sanders has made these commitments to Jesse Jackson. He's made commitments to make voting a universal right, which matters to every single American. But as we know with the criminal justice system, it is a tool of disenfranchisement, and it predominantly affects African Americans, African American men most of all. And if you want to fight for the universal right to vote, you need to ensure that it's guaranteed no matter what your status as a criminal is, either today or in the past. Bernie Sanders understands that. So this is a great endorsement, and maybe most important of all, Jesse Jackson was the one back in the 1980s who ran as a left-of-center challenge to the Democratic establishment, trying to create the Rainbow Coalition, a diverse, progressive coalition to shake up the status quo of the Democratic Party and of the American political establishment, broadly defined. And Jesse Jackson, unfortunately, he didn't succeed. It wasn't in the cards. Neoliberalism won the day in both his party and the Republican Party. But Bernie Sanders is this generation's version of someone trying to build that coalition, trying to build a coalition of working class people from African American, from Hispanic, from white, from Native American, from Asian American communities all across the country to challenge the social and political and economic status quo. And Jesse Jackson, I think, sees within Bernie Sanders the movement he tried to build, and indeed the movement Bernie Sanders endorsed all the way back in the 1980s. So in some ways, this endorsement is a full circle. You know, an effort that failed, unfortunately, to build a better political movement is being reignited in 2020 by Bernie Sanders. And it's really great to see Jesse Jackson behind it. And we have to juxtapose this, guys, to the other big endorsement of the day, where Kamala Harris endorsed Joe Biden. Now, this is really a travesty, I think, because whatever you think of Kamala Harris and her role in perpetuating criminal injustice in California, if she did one thing well in this entire primary process, it was pointing out the historical and contemporary troubles of Joe Biden as it pertains to segregation and racial justice. And yet, when the chips were down, Kamala Harris chose to endorse the man who basically she rightfully pegged as part of America's legacy of racial inequality. And she endorsed him anyway. So you can see Kamala Harris's endorsement is one of cynicism, is one of hypocrisy, is one of, party over ideas, the one of the Democratic Party over the Democratic electorate, the one of the class interests of the elite over the interests of working class people and African American people. Whereas Jesse Jackson's endorsement is all about the belief, the principles, the causes, the hope in building a better world. It's a tale of two endorsements. Bernie Sanders has one that's from the heart. Joe Biden has one right from the party elites. I know which one matters more to me.